Hello, my friends, and welcome to this recorded presentation on creating a digital preservation strategy for members of the Maine Contemporary Archives Collaborative. I'm Piekut Roy, and I'm recording this presentation on August 29th, 2021. In 2020, I took a digital preservation course at Simmons University with Professor Rhiannon Bativia, and I used what I learned in that course to develop a preservation workflow for submissions to the COVID-19 archive at Patent Free Library. Today, I'm going to go over a few of the things that I learned in that course, and also with the help of fellow MCA members Gabrielle Daniello and Hannah Stevens, who helped prepare this presentation. I hope that you can join MCA for our discussion on Thursday, September 2nd, where we will attempt to answer questions and get a little deeper into the topic. In our original participation agreement for using Omeka, it was suggested that libraries should develop strategies to preserve the digital and digitized items that they are sharing on their Omeka sites. This presentation is meant to suggest a jumping off point for beginning that process or improving the process you already have. This is an overwhelming topic, but it can be broken down into a few simple steps. An important thing to remember is that we're all in this together. It's new territory for most of us, and we're here to help each other. One of the presentation steps that I'll talk about today is literally the buddy system. I'm going to cover this topic in 3 sections. I will define what a preservation strategy is, introduce a few key concepts, and go over the steps for creating your strategy. A digital preservation strategy is a set of priorities and actions that work against the common threats to digital objects, such as file format obsolescence, damaged, degraded, or lost storage media, corrupted files, lost or forgotten metadata, provenance, and other information, or poor security. The term strategy is important to consider. A strategy is an ongoing process, and it calls for choices that are based on your individual needs and abilities. There are expensive strategies, like for instance, subscribing to a collection management database service, but you can also manage a strategy with a little planning, plus some free tools, plus time. So I'm going to introduce 2 concepts that come into play when you're developing a strategy: significant properties and preservation masters. Significant properties can be described as information content that must not be lost or degraded in quality over the entire lifetime of a digital file, even if other types of information are lost. For example, in an image of a painting, color is usually a significant property. In some types of poetry, typography and text formatting are significant properties, like in the Old French poem pictured on the right. Significant properties can be very obvious, or they might be esoteric. Generally, the more you know about a medium, the easier they're going to be to identify. Most of the time, you'll probably notice them right away. Oh, it's interesting how they formatted that line in an email or in a phone recording. Did you hear what that kid said in the background? Many of the submission files you receive will be simple enough that they don't require any changes to your preservation process. Casual snapshots, voice recordings, and emails tend to be fairly easy to preserve. The trick is to recognize when you have something special and take some time to learn about preserving that special quality. For example, my standard practice for an email submission to our COVID-19 collection is to copy and paste the body of the email into a simple plain text document. I do lose any formatting the text has, but the advantage is that the file is smaller and standardized. However, one patron sent a poem that included some emojis, In that case, I decided to save the email as a PDF, which preserved those special characters. Many of you will be familiar with text transcription, which is a type of translation. You're translating between human readable language and machine readable or searchable language. The example on the screen is a reformatting that does not do justice to the original. When I pasted the text into a translator, I wasn't considering the significant property of typography. What do you think would be a better way to represent this poem if you were to translate it into English? This isn't a perfect representation, but it's much better than one that ignores the original typography. I also don't speak French, so it's not great, but I do think that it gets the point across. The other concept that I want to tell you about is the preservation master. The preservation master is a file that is the best copy of a work. It's the one that you keep locked down and secured. Ideally, you're the only one who ever handles it. It's not edited or enhanced, meaning it's the most faithful to the original. And if somebody needs to see it, you use the preservation master to make an access copy, and then you give them the access copy. So now that you know about significant properties and preservation masters, we're ready to move on to the simple steps that will be part of your preservation strategy. These steps are based on the functional areas defined by the National Digital Stewardship Alliance in their levels of preservation matrix. They define 5 functional areas: storage, integrity, control, metadata, and content, which you'll see on the vertical axis in purple in the image. And 4, I guess, levels of sophistication, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the steps that I have outlined for you today focus on level 1 and level 2. If after this presentation you feel like you have a grasp of those steps and you want to do something more, this is a great tool for building on the knowledge that you already have. So definitely take a look at this if you feel like the presentation today is a little simple, or if you just want to understand a little bit more. For each of the 5 functional areas, I'll suggest a first step and then some optional next steps. Any resources or links that I mentioned will show up in one of these gray boxes. You can definitely consider the first steps as bare minimum steps and the other steps as totally optional. Remember that a strategy is based on your needs and abilities, so it's okay if you just take what you can use and leave the rest for another time. We'll start with content. Computer systems change over time. File formats that are easy to open and edit now may become unsupported, difficult to work with, or unrecognizable in only a few years. By identifying and controlling the file formats of your preservation masters, your files will be easier to work with in the future. So step 1 is to take a look at the Pronom Registry, which is a resource of the National Archives of the UK, and use it to identify and document the file formats of your original files. That might be JPEG or TIFF for an image, MP3 for an audio recording, or MP4 for a video. An optional next step is to take a look at the Library of Congress recommended file formats and select a file format that you prefer over any other format for your preservation masters. Doing this helps you make a plan later on for transferring those files if the format becomes obsolete. It's generally nice to have things be consistent. If you do decide to select a preferred file format, try to select a file format that will preserve the significant properties of your items. And then establish and document a standard workflow that you'll use to convert your submission files to your preferred file formats. Another thing you can do is limit your submissions to your preferred file formats so that you don't receive anything out of the ordinary. But I'm sure you can imagine some cons to that approach. So only use that if you need to. The second area is storage. We all know that some storage is better than others. We want to avoid any storage media that is easily broken or misplaced. And we want to store multiple copies of our preservation masters. We don't have to keep just one just because it's a master. So this is step one, but really it's a couple of steps. Choose a stable storage solution for your preservation masters. Generally, a server or a hard drive is best. The cloud is okay. Thumb drives and CDs or DVDs aren't great because they can get lost or damaged pretty easily. The general recommendation is to keep 2 or more sets of your preservation masters. This is the LOCKSS principle, which stands for lots of copies keep stuff safe. A good way to keep 2 or more sets of your preservation master is to pick a buddy. Use the buddy system. So let's say you keep a set of preservation masters on your work computer. Maybe you want to keep them on a different server. If you have multiple servers or a different drive, maybe you want to keep a set on your home computer. Take a third set and deposit that set with a partner organization, someplace that is unlikely to experience flooding if that's something that's an issue in your region, or doesn't. Yeah, I live on the coast, so I'm thinking about flooding and hurricanes, but I'm sure there are other things to worry about. So take a look at the list of participants in the Maine Contemporary Archives Collaborative and see if there's a buddy there who might accept a third set of your masters. The next area is metadata. That's my favorite area. Metadata is information about your files that is presented in a structured and consistent format. Metadata includes information that will be used to work with your preservation masters in the future. Store this information with consistency and accessibility in mind. The best advice I can give is that for your files, you should establish a consistent file naming convention. File names should be unique within your collection. So you don't want 2 file names in 2 separate folders that are the same but refer to different material. They do not need to be descriptive. You can think of the file name as a key that links to a description, possibly a descriptive catalog record or the description that is stored in the Omeka site. I like to use the accession number or another unique identifier. You can see in the example that the accession number that I've chosen for one of my items is 2020.2.010.1. And in the file name, it's the same numbers, just with a dash, because I've seen that sometimes when you include periods in file names, it's not a good idea. Create an inventory of your preservation masters using that unique identifier file name. Just use a spreadsheet. I'll show you an example of that in a second. Store multiple copies of your spreadsheet or whatever you choose for your inventory. Keep one stored on your desktop and put a copy with each set of preservation masters, including the set that you've deposited with your buddy. This is an example of a simple spreadsheet inventory, which includes the file name, the MIME type, which is another way of expressing the file format, the file size in bytes, and each of the storage locations in as much detail as you can for your masters. There's a space for the MD5 checksum, which I will explain in a few seconds. There is actually an established metadata standard for this type of information. It's called Primus, and I believe it's based in XML, similar to like an EAD code. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely feel free to check out Primus. Integrity. Because files degrade and become corrupted over time, it's important to perform integrity checks. They help us identify when degradation or corruption has occurred, and they tell us when to replace a corrupted file with one of our backup copies. The first step for integrity is to get a checksum for your preservation master and add it to your inventory, which I showed you a few slides ago. A checksum is a unique code which is generated by an algorithm based on the content of a file. Anytime the content changes, the checksum will also change. So you can use a file's checksum to verify that the content of the file does not change over time. Once you have the checksum, you'll want to periodically verify it, maybe on a quarterly or yearly basis, for each set of your preservation masters. So you want to get a checksum for each of your files and check it against the one that you recorded in your inventory. Excuse me. If the checksum has not changed over that time, that's great. If the checksum has changed, go to your second or third copy, maybe the one that your buddy has, check the fixity of that using the checksum. If it's good, copy it and just replace the corrupted file. And that way you always have this ability to kind of rotate out your files, and it's unlikely that they would all get corrupted at the same time. So that's a great way to keep your files safe. There are different options for getting a checksum. There are different tools that you can use. There are also different types of checksums. So 7-zip is one option. It's free, and it's something that's installed on all of the computers at our library. So you might also have it installed at your workplace. I think it might also be on my laptop. It might have come standard with Windows. I'm not really sure. If you do have 7-zip installed, you can right-click on a file. You should see the letters CRC/SHA in the menu. When you select that, there are a number of checksum formats available to you. CRC32, CRC64, SHA-1, SHA-256. So each of those is a different flavor of checksum. I can't really explain it beyond that. I'm sure any of them is fine. I was taught to use the MD5 checksum, which for some reason is not available with 7-zip. I use a program called Droid to get the MD5 checksum. It does a few other things and it's not super user-friendly. So if you're just trying to get a checksum, it might be more than you need, and it might be more work understanding it than you want to put in. Finally, AVP Fixity is a product that I have not tested. It's not free. I think you can get a free trial and then it might be like $5 a month. I think Hannah may have tried it. It might be worth checking out if neither of the free options is going to work for you. Finally, the last functional area is control. Control is security. You've created a preservation system and you want to keep it safe. How do you do that? Step one is to identify and document the people who have access to the system where your files are stored. Who in your organization has access to your files? Your coworkers, your interns, your volunteers, your patrons? Who in your IT service provider has access to your files? Who's your buddy? Do they have access? In this step, the idea is just to identify the people. You don't really have to do more than that. If you want to really lock it down, figure out who exactly has permission to open, move, or edit preservation masters, storage media where you keep them, and the inventories that you use to store the metadata. If you can, implement some tools to control access to those files and who has read-write permissions. And another good practice is just to keep a log of each time you take a preservation step and who is the person who performed it. A preservation step, an example of that is getting a checksum, checking a checksum, or moving something to a different storage location if you are not using the old storage location anymore. This is one of the things that the expensive automated systems do very, very well. So if security is a concern, that might be an area where, or that might be a reason why you would consider one of those systems. So that's it. Now you know more than you did a few moments ago. You can define a preservation strategy. You know when to think about an item's significant properties. You know that you should keep a master file for preservation. And you have a few steps to follow in order to protect the digital materials in your collections, including finding a buddy among the awesome membership of the Maine Contemporary Archives Collaborative. Take a minute to write down your questions and ideas for digital preservation, and remember to join us on Thursday the 2nd for further discussion. I hope to see you there.